Oh, well, it's probably right here.
Under your, yeah, it's there too.
Oops. Let me make sure I can do what I need to do and go between things.
Divine.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah?
The juice is wonderful.
Right. Did you? Oh my God.
Very nice.
Do I want to hand these out now or wait?
Good evening. This is a meeting on February 22nd of the Kent School Board, and it's a work session. And I'm going to call the regular meeting to order. And Superintendent Vella, I believe you have some introductions.
Thank you, President Clark, and rest of the board. Excited about this evening for our presentation on our strategic plan. And without further ado, I'm going to invite Dr. Wade Behringer, our Associate Superintendent of Strategic Initiatives and Operations, to introduce our guests.
Good evening, President Clark, members of the board, Superintendent Vella, Ms. Antello. Thanks for the opportunity. You guys are in for a treat tonight. Little interactive work on your part. I'd like to introduce to you the two of the leaders and the backbone of our DARTS team in organizational effectiveness. Dr. Ashley Birkland, our Executive Director of Organizational Effectiveness, and our Director of Strategic Initiatives, Joelle Barrano. If you guys want to come up and begin your presentation, you guys will enjoy this evening.
Right. Good evening, President Clark, members of the board, Superintendent Vella, Ms. Antello. As Wade said, we're going to walk through some data tonight and actually have an interactive process, have a protocol for you all to go through. But before that, we're going to do some level setting, and then we'll get into some data. Great. So first, a little bit about the DARTS team, which we are a part of. Really, the student learning is at the core of everything we do in support of teachers, and then our administration and staff. And then here you see the pieces of the DARTS team. So we have our data services team, research, technology, which is both our support services and our operations staff, and strategy. So those are all of the pieces, kind of rough teams that are here. But really, when we think about DARTS right now, we think about those pieces that we just talked about, and really that it's what we do, and it's not singularly owned by any team. So while data services is a team, we all use data. Research permeates throughout the DARTS team and throughout the system. So when we think about all of these pieces, we really think about them as integrated and not necessarily just siloed into the teams that, in DARTS. And with that brief introduction to the team, we could talk about it all day, but today we're talking about data. I'm going to turn it over to Joelle.
Great, thank you, Ashley, and good evening, President Clark, members of the board, Superintendent. So why data? When thinking about this question, it may be helpful to first look through the lens of our district's mission, our why as a system, to successfully prepare all students for their futures. Our mission explains our fundamental purpose as an organization, and we use data to understand if we're fulfilling our mission. Our vision explains how we will achieve our mission, and we can also use data to track our progress in implementing strategies to achieve that. So data practices are important because we all have a role to play in carrying out our mission. So data provides a baseline for measuring progress and change. It can provide insight into opportunities for improvement or where we are strong as a system. It's a tool to inform which strategies can be or are proven to be most successful in supporting our students. And with this, a quick note that we are often quick to utilize data to inform strategies and supports for our students, but also want to acknowledge that it is very relevant and important to staff as well, because sharing best practices and working together towards coherence is at the core of work, and data is instrumental in all of that. When talking about data understandably, there are many types, and not just qualitative and quantitative, but also data that speaks to implementation fidelity, separate from outcomes. So the data that we're walking through today will be focused on outcome data. But in order to reach those outcomes, we also need to think about the strategies that have been used to ensure those are enacted with fidelity. So they are very interconnected and interdependent upon each other. So as I mentioned, data is connected to all the work that we do, either producing it through our actions or using it as a tool. And this is an example here. You can see the connection, or the red thread, between operationally what we discuss with leaders at school and district and what you're discussing with Superintendent Vela for the superintendent goals. The summer leadership focus section on the left highlights the prompts that were used with our leadership team as we were looking at growth, fidelity, and coherence. And you see those themes carried through to the superintendent goals as well, in particular with implementation fidelity and measuring impact of that implementation. So our data principles and philosophy. So what you see here are our 6 data beliefs. Looking through these, number 1, data is only as accurate as the process that feeds it. What's important to keep in mind is that data doesn't come to be. There's a human element, whether that's humans engaged in the process that's creating that data or humans that are interpreting it. This next one here, more data can lead to better questions. More data can lead to better questions, but also noted here is that more data can sometimes be just more. And we don't want to be in analysis paralysis. We really want to keep action in the forefront. And so data is a place to start. Looking at number 3 and number 4, data is neutral and it's also a snapshot. So meaning from data is derived by the people looking at it. There are individual experiences and perspective that we all bring to that analysis, and that helps to derive and shape that meaning for each of us. It's a snapshot as it only shows current state. 5 and 6 are my 2 personal favorites. Number 5 is that data is not a one-time event, it's an ongoing and iterative process, and I think that that speaks to data as a starting place. Data will often help to inform where we can look deeper or dig deeper, have greater conversations, and really unpack with our students or with our staff what lives behind the numbers, and that's important to consider. And everyone is a data user, which is central to our data practice overall, really wanting to strengthen and cultivate data literacy and a data culture within Kent. So we'll be taking a look at a few dashboards here in a moment, but before I wanted to first acquaint you with how our dashboards are designed. The work we do around data is really focused on asking questions, so you see the design of our dashboards really reflective of that. You'll see the dashboards designed with a question followed by different charts that help to answer that question. In the work that we do, we're asking questions and not making statements, in particular not to lead to assumptions. You'll see this theme carried throughout our dashboards. And with that in mind, without further ado, I will turn it back over to Dr. Ashley Berkman to walk us through our data.
Before we jump into looking at some data, any questions about anything that you've seen so far, kind of setting the stage, level setting, terms used, all of that? All right, great. Like Joel said, we'll be getting into some dashboards, so there's some screenshots that are in your packet there, so you'll have those to go back to, but also wanted to share the interactivity of the dashboards, which our school administrators, central office administrators, other school staff have access to. And at the end, we'll have a time to talk through what might be helpful for you as board members in accessing data and what that would look like. So we're going to be walking through an abbreviated data protocol that our leaders went through this summer. So we looked at several different types of data. For the purposes of tonight, we're going to focus on graduation data and go through that same protocol. And one of the reasons we're looking at graduation data is because there's a connection to Goal 1 that we've been talking about. And there's also a relationship to the high school SIP plans and their focus on graduation as well. And just so you all know, and just keep this in mind, this is a process. There are no right or wrong answers as we're going through these prompts. So it's really what's coming to mind, what's resonating, what are you thinking about? It's all fair game. So we will jump into the first. This is kind of a pre-assessment, if you will. So we're not looking at the graduation data yet, but take a few moments to think to yourself, what might you see in the graduation data? What wonderings do you have? What expectations might you have, and what is influencing those? And what do you anticipate are some learnings you could take away when thinking about graduation data? So just a little bit of time thinking about what you might see or questions you might have before we take a look at that data. Some of you have already seen it, so, you know.
So are you asking us to respond, or?
You can. If you have thoughts right now to these, you can respond. You can take notes and save them for later. We will, whatever works best. So if there are wonderings or questions that you have right now, feel free to throw them out.
I glanced at this before, but what came to mind with me is I went back to where I graduated from high school a couple years ago, and I was amazed that they had this is before COVID. They had a 96% graduation rate, and I went, wow. And I thought, how do we compare school to school what they mean by these rates? Because bias and everything like that came into my mind. So I don't want to go into that, but.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to struggle with this. The cold reality is COVID brought a dramatic change and impact and a need to basically try and accommodate in a fashion that we have not done so for various reasons, not the least of which is there is a different world between being in a classroom and learning from home. And so my problem is we accommodated that and waived some of the requirements. And I'm assuming that one of the things that's going to happen is the state is going to come back in and revert back to the older system, and suddenly we're going to see a drop in those numbers. And it's going to look like we're not doing the job we used to do, but it's a false comparison. So how do we bridge that gap?
Can we move to the actual data? Because I think a lot of what I have to say kind of piggybacks on both of those, but I want the data up when I put my comment out there.
Yeah, I'll just speak to President Clark's comment real quick. So those waivers will go away. They go away next year. And I think that speaks to the importance of this data being one point, and the context that surrounded it is even more important. That we might see that drop that happens. We might see that statewide. We might see it, here, and being able to explain why and know, well, those waivers went away, and be able to have those conversations. Because I think that is a very real takeaway. We're pulling some of that data right now and seeing, we've had hundreds of students access those waivers. So that is definitely a consideration in all this. So, yes.
Well, mostly just because with the protocol, generally, we just look and we don't make assumptions or analyze, we just look at the data. I'm assuming that's what the protocol's gonna be.
Yeah, this is step one of the protocol, just kind of framing and understanding where you might be coming from and how you're entering into the data. So kind of putting those assumptions or expectations out into the open and then coming to it as we'll cue into the next slide, into this next part of the protocol. It's really about what do you see and really the facts of what you see, not trying to explain why. We'll get there. I promise we'll get to that part. But what do you see? And so this is where I am going to switch over to the dashboard and go through that. So, but here are some of the prompts around there, because the screen's going to go away, but you have that. So I observe patterns, I can count, I'm surprised, just facts, observations of what you see. I'm going to go here. And there we go. That big enough for always zoom in?
No.
I guess not.
Can you do Control plus? There we go.
All right, so these are our historical 4- and 5-year graduation rates. So the blue line is 4-year cohort, graduating 4 years from entering in 9th grade. The orange line is 5 years. So when you look at 21, 22, that's really the 5th year for a class of 2021 student. So, you know, you can't have a 4- and 5-year at the same time for the same group of students. But, so you kind of see that the orange line is always a little higher, more students are graduating in that 5th year. So this is the overall, everybody, excluding iGrad, they're excluded based on the type of program they're excluded from the district-wide rate. Yes.
So my pattern, I was going to say, going back to what Director Clark was saying, because my question was how many waivers did we assign to graduates? And looking at 1920, which is when the first year of COVID was, we had a very high graduation rate, because I'm assuming there was a lot of waivers we gave for seniors to graduate. And then we noticed that pattern went down a little bit in 2021 because there wasn't as many waivers given, but there's still waivers that were given. And so I'm noticing that not all having to do with waivers, I'm assuming, but that was one of my questions, like, did waivers play a role in this as I noticed the patterns and how graduation went up? I want to say that we just graduated a lot of students because we're amazing and we're getting kids through, but I also know that there's some other factors that could be affecting those graduations. But I'm not thereforeing or becausing, I'm
Yep,
noticing patterns.
right.
Again, I want to go back to my question is, I understand the pattern here, and I can see it. But when we're comparing our graduation rates to other districts in the state of Washington or other states, we're comparing supposedly Washington State programs with Washington State programs, right? So it leads me to still not quite understand some of the data I've seen in other districts. And this isn't going to tell me that, but I'm just saying, well, let me cut to the chase. Some colleges rate certain high schools you come out of higher than others, right? Trying to get into the entry. So how does that factor into graduation rates? I mean, are we really giving a true rate because of our standards or overall standards or the world standards? It's a bigger question.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's some basic credit requirements that have to be fulfilled across the state, but those can vary from district to district. There are the testing requirements or pathways and those pieces that are standard, but you know, there are different ways to grant credit. So there's a lot of nuance of how that student gets across the finish line and graduates, so, yeah.
Then how do some colleges take other high schools over other high schools and rate them higher? How do they get to that determination?
I don't understand the question, Leslie. It is about ranking how. I guess I don't understand what you're asking.
I mean, I think that has a lot more than just, I mean, graduation
Yeah,
rates.
I agree.
Right, like that's in, what levels of programs do they have?
Right.
What,
Right.
like, you know, teacher to student
Right,
ratio
right,
they
right,
have.
right.
I mean, like, there's all of those things
This-
that go into ranking, which
Right, right.
is a totally different thing.
Then,
I
yeah.
think that this is kind of a one unique piece of data.
Right.
That goes into a lot of other things, right? And a lot of other things go into this data.
Right, there are a lot of things that happen to get a student here, right?
Yeah.
And unpacking that is a conversation for another day, but.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, like, we're
Absolutely.
not seeing what the grades are of the kids that graduated. We're not seeing, did they have to take a certain class over again, or
Right,
did they
right.
get, you know, take all AP classes all the way through? I mean,
Right.
we just see, did
graduate.
they meet the requirements of what our district has and what the state has? And did they cross the finish line?
And ultimately, that's different. If you are in special education, you still graduate, you might have different graduation requirements, but if you meet the goal, you still meet the graduation requirement, and not everyone's gonna have necessarily the same requirement. So I feel like it's a little bit of apples and oranges, but also like dual credit, we don't know like what you were saying, we don't know dual credit, AP, IB, like
All
any
of
of
that,
those,
yeah.
credit retrieval, we don't know any of that, but as long as I get that check mark, it's counted towards the graduation. We just don't know that from just this
From
data.
just this.
There's other data, like I noticed on here that talked about that, well, not on here, but on the district site, there was the public data. I
The
looked at
fast
that
fact.
and looked at the dual credit CTE, because I'm always looking at CTE. And that's different than, this is just graduation. Right, like this is, like that's always.
Basic graduation.
Basic graduation rate.
Yep, at the end of the day,
They
that
met the
fourth year,
criteria.
fifth year,
Right,
did
right.
they?
Right.
If I may.
Yeah.
Back to Director Benno's comment early on. It's a protocol that you saw on the first slide, that we all come with all of our background experiences and expectations, even comparisons, Director Hamada, absolutely. So what you actually are going through is this protocol is designed to do that, right? What's important as we move forward to the next slide and you start thinking about, okay, so what am I actually really looking at? So the protocol is designed to look at the data. What is it that you're really seeing? And from that, begin to form questions about it. It's stagnant. It's not moving. There's nobody behind it. There's no, whether the high school was standard-based or wasn't, whether did they grade on effort? There's all those questions that what the protocol is designed to do is get us to look at the data in a way that it's not telling us one thing or the other. It's us that are being influenced or influencing it. So we don't start problem solving something that's not there in front of us. Right? So, sorry, I wanted to go a little bit deeper into the protocol piece
Yep.
as you begin to keep looking at some of this data.
Yeah, and we'll get there. We'll get to that piece where we're trying to analyze, see what those factors are, but for it's just that landscape piece.
Because data is a snapshot, that's
Yep.
number 4.
That's right.
And it's
Back to our
neutral, which
data.
is number 3.
And you'll see we have like the questions here.
I want the answer now.
Good job, Director Hamada.
I'm going to scroll down, which is, this is another one that you have a look at. This is the breakout by ethnicity, and this is our 4-year cohort. So just the 4-year we're looking at here for the last 5 years.
One of my observations on this one is two. One, that there's not a number subscribed to each group. So how many people are identifying themselves as that ethnicity? And I think that matters
Yep.
because for a number of reasons.
Yeah. It's just one of the pieces that gets lost when we're printing those out, but if you're actually in the dashboard, you can hover over and
You
it'll
can,
show those
okay.
pieces.
Good.
Perfect.
Yep.
That's good to know.
Good to know.
Yep.
Thank you. So it matters to you too. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And just an observation, obviously, that we, putting people into ethnicity is hard.
Yeah, this comes off of enrollment forms and
I'm not, I think that we are given the categories that we're given and for, and how they're made and it is hard. Yeah.
any other observations on this one? We have a couple others to look at, and then we will spend the bulk of our time in that really, what does this all mean space? All right. I think the next one we were looking at, we'll go through here. Oh, right. So these are the rates for our students receiving multilingual ed services. So I filtered the dashboard, it was in there, so this is something that our schools can do. They can go in, see different groups, and the numbers will change. So these are the 4- and 5-year cohorts for that group. Any observations here?
I mean, compared to the graduation rate of everyone else, I noticed that the percentage in 2021, 22, even though it's the highest, it's lower than the rest of the class, or the rest of the data.
Overall, yeah.
Overall data, yes.
By about 10%, yeah.
And I have questions, but I'm not asking questions. I do have questions.
All right, we do the last one for our students receiving inclusive ed services.
Just going to point out, if I may, for the board, note that what Ashley's doing is what our teams can do. They can drill down or up, depending on what they're looking at, as they begin to do the same protocol as you're doing. So what if? And they could start look at either students or student groups, grade levels. They can do that kind of work. You couldn't on this slide, of course, but they do have that on the dashboard.
Yep. So this is for our students receiving inclusive ed services. These are the graduation rates here. One of the observations that I made was how much this bounced around, and especially from that 1920 to 2021, that our four-year rate went down considerably. And I will stop there, no explanation.
Sorry. Go ahead. Well, I'm also observing that the number of graduates that we're looking at is 125 compared to,
16 something, yeah.
yes,
1,600, yeah.
1,600. So, I mean, we're looking at a factor greater than 10, right?
Yep.
My observation is also noticing like the 5-year cohort is lower in 2021 and 22, because usually that's higher. So I'm curious about things related to that, but that's an observation I have. And that the percentage is also very low, 69% is very low compared to the overall group.
Yeah, so remember the lagging piece of the 5 years, so really that 56.1 would then be compared to that 61.4, that would be roughly the same cohort of students. So have that lower 4 year is leading to that lower 5 year, yeah. All right. Those are all the views we're showing you on here. I will just kind of go through here briefly. There are some big numbers here, just so really quickly you get that visual of what the percentages are for the current cohorts and the number of graduates. There is some school level data in there, and schools can see that too and see how their peers did. There's the breakdown by ethnicity for just the current year, the breakdown by programs, and then what we saw here, the longitudinal for ethnicity. And there are some other tabs here that talk about our students that disengaged throughout and that didn't meet that finish line. And then also our continuing students who were here at the end of their 4th year but didn't graduate for whatever reason. I personally find that group intriguing and digging into what may have happened there. And there's some views in there talking about credits and where they may not have met the mark. So that's also available for schools to take a closer look at. But we will move into the, I guess, is it helpful to stay on these right here instead of going back to the questions that you all have there? We'll keep these up and we can go through and look at different pieces as we need to.
I have a random question.
Yeah.
Can you scroll down to gender? Because in Renton's data, there's always male, female, and X because of gender markers. Do we not have any students that identify with an X gender marker? Because I only just see male and female.
We do. I think it was just that we are filtered on inclusive ed.
Oh, got it.
And so great question.
I'm always curious.
Yes, then that does show up over there. So
You.
2 graduates in 21, 22. Yep. Yep, and that will show up in our other dashboards as well as that's pulling it. Yep. All right, so reflection questions or meaning making or any of those pieces, analyzing. So there's some prompts here, but really we can kind of start to go over. So what about the data may have surprised you? Did you have any beliefs that were confirmed? What questions do you still have? What actions would you take? What would you want to know more about? We're into that space now, so it's all fair game.
Well, obviously, I'm disturbed when I look at the major graphing by ethnicity and reading Native American in that category.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the pieces also where that that N size, that sample size comes into play too, right? So for one graduate, so there were 2 students. And that's the piece, like, we don't want to suppress any of that data because these are students that are here and they're graduating or not graduating. So we're showing that and surfacing that with the sample size, but it's also that consideration of why it might be changing so much. But, right, why didn't 2 students graduate? So.
I also was caught off guard in the, forgive me, the language for a dual.
Dual language
Language, yeah.
programming? Or multilingual.
Yeah, multilingual, because I would have anticipated those numbers would have climbed, and they did not appear to.
Move them back around. Yeah, so why might that have been the case? This is here. So it kind of flattened from 1920 to 2020 into 21, and then went up this last year as the whole group did, but still about 10% behind the overall.
I mean, I have bigger questions about inclusive ed and just, I think about like my undergrad experience where my advisor said to me, Joe, you need to take a special education class because you're gonna have students in your classes who are gonna be in those programs, and it's not required for you to take a class on how to accommodate or modify students. And I was like, okay, probably one of the best classes I could have taken in undergrad, because literally that's not something they cover in the regular classes to graduate. And so my wondering, when we look at inclusive education, is how many educators have been trained on supporting students with IEPs and accommodating and modifying curriculum, and that might not be something that everyone knows how to do, so that can also contribute to graduation, passing, et cetera. And we may not know. I make the assumption that everyone does, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. So that's a big wondering I have as far as like, what are we doing to support our students? Minus MTSS, there's also some curricular things that need to be invested in to support our teachers in the classrooms and doing that. And also like, with the training of paraeducators, what's that training look like to support students too, or inclusive education? So those are my huge, easy questions, right? On how
Yeah.
to support students.
Yeah,
on
we'll
a
get back to you
large
on
level.
that.
Oh, yes.
I would just, no, thank you for that, for the rest of our board. So there's students that may be on a 504. That's different than an IEP. So accommodations would be provided by all. In addition, IEP services includes the teacher and as part of the team. And so as they're working through their program, there should be a partnership there. Yes, to your point on, depending on the services, there needs to be a partnership within that classroom, and how might they help support that student with comprehension, for example, with fiction or nonfiction, books and things that they need to read. But it becomes, in high school, at middle and high school, it becomes more nonfiction. And how do we present new information to students in a way? So I appreciate you bringing that up, Director Bennell.
Yeah, I just remember one of my students one time was like, hey, you need to wear this when you teach. I was like, what is this? And he's like, oh, I have hearing aids. This helps me hear better. And I was like, well, how does the equipment work? He's like, I don't know. They said that you'd know how to do it. And I was like, let me find out. And so there might be some things like that that could happen where all in good intention, and the IEP happened first try, and I had the student third try. And so like so there might be some things that I don't get. And so it's always a good thing when students advocate for themselves. But sometimes I may not be in the know, so it's always good like working with the student's roster teacher and the IEP team is always very helpful.
And I think it's important to understand how diverse that group of students is, and that for some students, like their IEP says that it's going to take more than 4 years to graduate, and that's part of the plan. And we see those students at our top program, and they are there till they're 21, and we don't expect to see them here. So just the nuance that goes into what we're seeing here in some of that context.
How are those students shown in the data since they're more than 5 years?
That's a good question.
Yeah. So for the 4-year cohort, they'll count as non-graduates until they graduate. And some of that is around like state law, like if a student graduates and has a diploma, they can't continue services. So they'll get that at the end of the 7th year if they've met all those requirements. And there is a 6-year and a 7-year graduation rate also, and we'll see that you get a lot more, I would say, return in that 5th year, but then it keeps going up in that 6th and 7th year as well. But they are counted as non-graduates, and that's part of that context addition. Like, we know that there are students who it's not their plan to graduate in 4 years, and that's part of the story in those numbers too.
That's good to know. That's a good reminder.
Yep.
I'm just curious that, data is always as good as the input, right? So how can we make sure that the input is the accurate?
Yes, so I think one of the pieces I think about when you said is that for our students that have left us and really understanding, we could get into the nuances of the graduation rate, but when students transfer out and if we know where they go and get that request for records, they come out of our cohort. So they're not in the numerator or the denominator. They then belong to wherever they are now. But there are students where we don't know. And those are the ones that end up counting as a non-graduate. But if we can find out where they are and get those requests, then we can do the same thing, say they're confirmed and they come out of our cohort. So I know a lot of high schools have really been undertaking that effort of like finding those students, whether it's office staff or whoever has that connection of say like, did they really disappear or can we find them somewhere? So that's a piece of that too, because there probably are students in there who really are going to school somewhere else, but for whatever reason, they might be in another country, another state. The system's pretty comprehensive within our state, but when they go out, it gets a little bit more difficult. Past life, I did a lot of graduation work. So. Other questions, wonderings, actions you would take, other data that you would want to see? I'm sure there's other. This is kind of the tip of the iceberg.
There's a lot of digging needs to happen. But what I always ask myself is, how do we? It's a kid that's graduating, but yes, they finished the requirements, but are they meeting standards, right? So how do we quantify that is always something I wanted to ask, because there was something called No Child Left Behind, right? So yes, the child is going through each grade, meeting the requirements, but are they really on standard so that by the time they graduate, whether they want to go into any profession or anything, are they ready for college-ready kids? So that's, I was always wondering, how do we make sure that we can put that into the data so that we can measure also with our kids?
That's
a big question.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we have some like other resource of it, like we have like an on-track dashboard, which is pulling in like some of those grades and credits and some of those test scores and all of that, but that, you'll never get that full story.
Right.
And, we've switched with the state requirements of moving from having to pass that SBA test to also having more pathways, because some students need a different way to show that they're proficient and at standards. So the pathway starts to get at that piece, but I think there's a lot of nuance there.
Right.
But, yeah, what does it mean at the end of the day that you got that diploma? What was your experience?
Because even students who take the same classes, the teachers might assess in different ways or have different assignments
Absolutely.
or whatnot. And one might be more project-based, and one might just
Absolutely.
be, so you just never know. So
Right.
we don't know if they always get the same standard. In
Right,
theory,
right,
like
right. It's hard. It's so that's, yeah, you're right. This is looking at, 30,000 foot level, and to dig deeper is where I'm always interested to find out how can we, so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was getting to the heart of the question when I was asking about different districts. I just didn't probably say it exactly the way it was, but I want to know if our kids or other districts, if they're going really out and really prepared, even though we have the statistics, at what level are they prepared and are they going to succeed? I mean, really succeed, not just have a piece of paper on their hands.
There are other forms
Right.
of data that you can look at for that comparison after they leave. And to Vice President Farah's point on standards, so we do have standards.
Right.
Yeah.
We have grade level standards
Yeah.
that as we're looking at designing two things. One, adopting curriculum to help support teachers, support students meet those grade level standards. How are we measuring them, not just from a quantitative and qualitative perspective? What you're seeing is, quote, the end, right? And we talked about in goal 1 that graduation
Right.
is one
One.
way. There's so much more to that.
Right.
And
So
graduation,
much more to that.
graduation is not only solely about the students that are on pace for graduation as seniors entering their senior year. Graduation's about their whole experience. And I think it was, Director Margell, you talked about standards being that's not the ceiling, that's the floor. And for some students, we heard one of our principals talk about, so what happens if they already meet the graduation standard, the grade level standard, are they still in that same grade level? Do we have options for them to move, talk about tiered systems of support, or are they getting 1 year's growth in 1 year's time? Or do they need to get accelerated growth if there are multilingual students, for example? But moral of that is that there are other forms of assistance. This is just one. And the protocol is really designed to be able to let's ask deeper questions. And I think you heard school improvement plan presentations last week or the week before. That's exactly the protocol that our school teams go through. They're digging deep into that data, and they're monitoring how students are doing in a smaller or shorter period of time versus waiting till the end. I heard presenters say that's at the end would be like the autopsy versus me trying to be able to do something before
it gets to the end. Yeah.
Right? A true example, but what he was trying to say is, so you got to look at that data
Right
for
there.
what it is right there. And so I hope I didn't take all of that time, but I just wanted to just connect this work and with the board's protocol, the protocol the board just went through, and compare it to what our teams do in our schools and continue to do.
Right.
Very much so, and I think that that's an excellent point to make as well, that if, our standards are our floor, so to speak, as Superintendent Vela shared, I think there's an opportunity then for us as a system to think about what our strategic opportunity is in that space. Are there objectives and strategies that we want to employ as a system to think more holistically about readiness in the sense that you've shared? Because I think that, that starts to really strongly intersect with our upcoming work on our strategic plan. So I love the direction of that, because those are exactly at the heart of what we hope to unpack in that process.
I guess, for me, like probably many of us up here, we want to know we like the whys, right? And so you want to see the whys. So with all of the data I could have ever asked for, which it becomes to a point that's, right, it's just more data, but, it's the whys of, what are those indicators that we would be able to see? And I think it goes much beyond just credits, right? It goes beyond, what grade did you get in this class, being able to see, of the people who graduated, how many of them played a sport? Even just one season. How many of them did the school musical? How many of them had a best friend at school? How many of them had a teacher who knew their name and at least once a week said, hey, how are you doing? Like, those are all the things I would love to see, because I'm sure if we were able to get that data, we'd be able to see a lot more of, man, if we just do this, we could increase graduation rates by that much, and we could increase, what are those things? And that's what, there's a lot. And, what becomes the most important? And unfortunately, I feel like it always goes back to what you look on the outside. What's your gender? What's your ethnicity? And which is probably the most uninteresting part about me. And I would much rather see if there was something that we could do to talk about the engagement level of our students than what they look like and what their gender is.
If, if I can, I was a former high school teacher, and so the 4 and 5 year cohorts still, just from appearance, assumes that you've been in the same school district all the way up to
Yeah.
that point, which of course is completely destroyed when you look at the number of kids that we have that are in multifamily dwellings. Because that doesn't match up at all. And so it asks a question in terms of externalities that play into the support system for those kids. And I have no idea how you measure that.
Do we have that data? I feel like I've seen that in Renton before, and it looks very different than students who come in and out of the district.
Yeah, so when we get the data back, there's kind of like, did they enter the cohort in 9th grade in your school, or did they transfer in at some point? So we can, and we have enrollment data too, to be able to parse out, were you here the whole 4 years, or did you come in your sophomore year, your junior year, and weren't here continuously for those whole 4 years? We've pulled some data before too, to look at like, just time in KSD total, like you were here from kindergarten to 12th grade, and it's in a different dashboard. I'll share it with you all later. But there's a connection there too with that continuity of students that started in elementary versus middle, and the impact that that has on graduation as well. So,
I think-
yeah, all those different pieces.
I think it was, Director Bennett, you brought that up quite a while ago. I brought out mobility data. And so that really is connected, President Clark, with continuously enrolled cohorts. So if you just take the kindergartner that enters into Kent School District, how long was that kindergartner in continuously enrolled as one? And let's just stay there and keep drilling on, did that student move from school to school with no choice of their own, potentially, right? And as you start digging deeper and deeper, you pull this kind of data because it's important to goal one when we talked about the whole child. When you start thinking about the whole child, yes, Director Margill, you need to look at the whole child. Do they have an adult in the building that they can go to regardless of who it is? Do they, how's their home and family life? Are they connected to activities that they're able to get there? Do they have buses to get them there versus others? That, I thought I'd throw that out.
Thank you.
No, but seriously, it's about, if we're truly looking at the whole child, we'll look at the whole child. Not simply just ethnicity, those kinds of things. And that's the work that our teams do that you saw a couple weeks ago. Do we do all of it? No, it's a constant, continuously asking more questions. So good part of data analysis is about, so what's not there, and what other questions do I have, and how might I get that data? And I'll say one more, and is us getting us to programmatic changes. So if we really dig deep, we know whether the intervention or programs that we are providing are actually supporting that continuous enrolled student. Or not. So we look at that to be able to help support the system as kids are going through it versus waiting to the end.
Yeah.
Waiting to that. I mean, I think the executive director of Equity, Simone Ham, talked about sense of belonging,
Yeah. Love. Do you feel loved?
really. So that's what you were talking about, like, does that child
Yeah.
feel like when they're in the school building, do they feel belong?
Yeah.
So therefore, yeah.
And please, this is not a critique of the data, because I think this is so important, is like the base, right? You have to have a foundation that's strong, and that's what I think this, and it just leads to all of those next questions. So this is not at all anything bad about the data. In fact, it's very good, thank you. And it's nice to see all of it that we can really use and drill down into. And it's nice to have it there again as that foundation. We just start, like you said, you ask more questions, you get some data, and more questions come up.
Yeah, and when we did this over the summer with leadership, we were very clear up front. We're looking at these specific data points, but that's not to downplay any of those other pieces, like sense of belonging, like activities. And it's data that we could pursue capturing and pulling in here? Or is it something that happens at the building level, and that balance of like, you have more questions and then it happens more intimately at the building or like with a team? So we have those conversations too about what do we surface here for the system? And then how does that get nuanced and understood at the building? So, and this is the quantitative data, and I would say it's like the easy data to pull, right? Like the state provides reports,
Right.
like we're collecting things. Some of those others are harder to get, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't collect them, and it doesn't mean they're any less valuable than these pieces here, so.
Yeah. Looking at some of the state data, I have seen information around families identified as military families, and I don't know if that's something. We also saw data around people experiencing homelessness versus not. I'm trying to think about some of the other categorizations. And so do we just follow a lot of those categories that the state?
Yep. So in this dashboard, we have a few of the other ones too. I don't see, the filters are in here. We haven't changed all the labels, but MLE, race, ethnicity, gender, inclusive ed, low income, so those that qualify for free and reduced lunch, foster care. There's also the McKinney-Vento students experiencing homelessness. Military is something we're required to collect also. We haven't put that into any of our dashboards, but that is data that we have also. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Wrap us up, yeah? All right. All right, so this is just a reminder and a closing. Remember, data is a tool. It can help us gain better insights and ensure we're successfully supporting all students. But it's really about those conversations, the conversation we just had. It wasn't about looking and say, oh, we're at 89%, all right. It's about what does that mean, what's working, what's not, and really getting in. Data is important, but the knowledge gained from analyzing it is even more important. So it's the meaning that you make from it. It's not the data itself, it's how you interact and what you do as a result. And then this kind of came from the beginning of the year, but it's talking about the importance of planning and how you're going to use data. You're going to have data cycles, work towards continuous improvement to start the year strong, continue and finish the year strong. So really being intentional, and that's what we were trying to set up with our leaders back in the summer. Some tools for how to use data, providing data, and putting those systems in place for the year. Lastly, there's a prompt for you. You don't have to answer now, but for you as a board director, what data do you need to be successful in your role? What questions do you have that you're not currently able to answer? How can our team best support you with data in the future? So you don't have to answer now. If you have thoughts, we'll take them, but you can also relay those through Superintendent Vela, and we look forward to continuing data conversations with you all.
I just appreciate the link to the public data, because I didn't know how to log into Tableau or where to find it, so I appreciate that public link of the different things. I'm sure there's more whatnot out there. I know I asked that last time, so I appreciate getting this link at least and seeing what's here, so thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. These are a few things that are made available. One I missed that I was reminded earlier, there's our assessment calendar is a dashboard now, so it makes it easier visually to interact with, and we'll make sure that gets sent out to you all as well. All right.
Okay.
Any last questions?
Thank you. I just wanted
Thank you.
to formally thank our darts team. They have done and always have done a great job. And whenever we need something, they also get together as a team and say, let's see how we can provide that for you. So they've been very, very helpful to us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, it's 5:53, and we're going to adjourn. We're actually going to disappear for an executive session for approximately 30 minutes. The purpose of this executive session is to discuss with legal counsel potential litigation and the legal or financial risks of a course of action. So, that, we're adjourned.
any of them.
It was a controversial one. Yeah, we're going back to that.
None of them are.
The 2020 or the whatever that is, that's not on this one. So we're good.
5220.
Yes. Or 4220 or whatever.
Yeah, there
it
it
is.
goes.
Okay, so
Is that Adams?
Yes. I believe so.
Good evening and welcome to the Kent School Board meeting of February 22nd. It's currently 6:30 PM. I'm going to go ahead and take roll call from my board membership. Vice President Farah,
present.
Director Ramada,
Present.
Director Beno,
Present.
Director Margell.
Present.
And I'm now going to ask Director Margell to lead us with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming. This is a meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. We welcome the public's participation in this board meeting and thank those of you who have come to this meeting and those who are viewing our live stream. The purpose of the board meeting is for the board to conduct its business in public. During the meeting, the board will listen to but not respond to comments from the visitors. Individuals with items for the board or superintendent must provide the items directly to the safety services staff. Approaching the dais during the board meeting is not allowed. Any items turned in will be provided to the board and superintendent following the meeting. Those wishing to comment must complete a comment card and turn it either before the meeting begins or no later than the beginning of the legislative update. No cards will be accepted once this report has begun. Visitors who have completed a comment card indicating a desire to speak to an agenda item will be called on at that portion of the agenda. There is a brief delay in the live stream audio, and we will allow extra time for you to make your way if you're in an outside overflow room. When it is your turn to address the board, please state your name at the beginning of your testimony. Public comments will be heard after the opening during preliminary communications from the audience, at specific agenda items, and during final communication from the audience. Students will be the first to speak on any topic. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. You will hear a timer when that time is up. Please do not use specific names of staff or students or personal identifiable information. Abuse of public comments personally directed towards staff or board members will not be tolerated. The president may interrupt or terminate an individual statement when it is too lengthy, obscene, or irrelevant. Per board procedure, written materials to provide board members with background information should be submitted to the superintendent's office at least 1 week in advance of the meeting. I'm now going to invite Vice President Farah to read the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, President Clark. We acknowledge that we are gathered upon ancestral lands of Muckleshoot Indian tribe who historically lived throughout the area between the Cascade Mountains and Puget Sound.
Thank you. Superintendent Bella, are there any changes to the agenda?
President Clark, there are no changes to the agenda.
Okay, with that, then we'll go to section 2, and I'll call on Superintendent Bella for introductions.
Thank you, President Clark. I'd like to invite Mr. Randy Heath, our Associate Superintendent of Schools and Academic Support, to begin the recognition.
Good evening, President Clark, members of the board, Superintendent Vela, and Ms. Santello. We have a great presentation tonight. With us tonight, we have Dr. Amber McCulloch, who is the Executive Director of K Post-Secondary Education at the Puget Sound Educational Service District, who has a recognition for 2 of our high schools tonight. So I'll have her step up and introduce the award.
Thank you for the introduction. Good evening, President Clark, members of the board, Superintendent Vela. As Randy said, I'm Amber McCulloch from Puget Sound ESD. And again, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm here to publicly recognize Kent Lake and Kent Ridge High Schools for achieving initial or renewed accreditation status for the next 6 years, so through 2028, through the AESD accreditation process. A little bit about ESDs. Puget Sound ESD is one of 9. We serve the 35 school districts in King and Pierce counties and Bainbridge Island. And typically ESDs are all about serving the needs of their respective regions, but collectively the 9 ESDs operate the Association of Educational Service Districts, AESD network that serves broader purposes at scale, and accreditation is one of those services. We've been doing accreditation since the mid-2000s, and we're the largest accrediting body in the state. So what is accreditation, and why are we here to recognize your outstanding educators today? So it used to be that this was an external stamp of approval that maybe had measures of questionable relevance. And now it's a voluntary process. It's research-based, it's all about self-study. So it still provides that external stamp of approval, but really with this process saying these measures are relevant, they're important to us, it communicates an external standard of quality. So it's a recognition. The process utilizes peer review to help schools identify and develop their strengths, ensure effective governance, and improve opportunities and outcomes for students. So it's a student-centered process. The primary objective is really all about ongoing student improvement. The schools work with AESD accreditation coaches, and they work on a school improvement plan, which is required. And so as they work through that, there's a 6-step cycle of inquiry, action, and improvement. So it's grounded in 4 foundational elements. It's data-driven, it's student achievement focused, it has research-based foundation and actions, and it's collaboratively determined, so working with staff, students, community. And this takes place typically over the course of a year, and then there's a presentation with a voluntary ESD boards, and ESD boards are elected by their local school boards. And so once that approval happens, again, it's a 6-year approval, and there's a mid-year, our 3rd-year review, checking in at the midpoint just to see how things are going. And so it's a rigorous process, and that's why we're here today, to recognize the fact that you have 2 high schools who have gone through that entire process and are here to be recognized this evening. So at this point, if we could have those 2 outstanding principals, Heidi Maurer from Kent Lake High School and Krista Ernst, principal of Kent Ridge High School, if you could come on up. I'd like to publicly recognize both of you. So as part of this, there's the 2 plaques that we'd like to present. Hopefully they are somewhere, they can be displayed somewhere public. There's also an electronic logo that AESD includes. And also something I wanted to share as part of the presentation is the commendations. So these are directly from the review panel. Items to note that really stuck out to that review. So Kent Lake High School is commended as follows. Kent Lake is data rich, but also has systems and structures in place to take data from a global systemic level to an individual student level for purposes of tailored interventions. So let's start with Kent Lake. Thank you very much. Congratulations. And for Kent Ridge, robust data systems that effectively translate into interventions for specific students, and an appreciation for how visible each student is in the analysis of data and the development of interventions. Again, thank you for letting me recognize these outstanding educators.
If you would, we'd like to take a picture up front, if that's okay. Please join us up front of the dais.
1, 2, 3, cheese.
Okay, that takes us on to section 3, preliminary comments from the audience, and I have one card from Michael Adams.
Hello, my name is Michael Adams, and my family and I have lived in the Kent School District for 31 years, and 2 of our children were educated in the public schools here from K through 12, graduating from Kent Ridge High School. I'm here to testify about the high cap and dual language programs. Both are vital in providing growth and learning opportunities for the students in our district. I feel very strongly that education is a great equalizer in life, that all kids, regardless of their background or the financial status of their families, are entitled to receive the best possible education our community can provide. Our daughter Kelly graduated in 2015. She was an A, sometimes B+ student, and went on to graduate from the University of Washington in Seattle, and has spent the last 4 years as a high school English teacher in both Kona, Hawaii, and Cleveland, Ohio. Our son James graduated in 2019. He was a straight A student, a 3-sport varsity athlete, and will be graduating this year from MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, as a software engineer. James was born with a speech impediment and was placed into the special ed programs at Lake Young's and Ridgewood Elementary Schools, as well as Northwood Middle School. He was also placed into the high cap program in the 3rd grade, but there was no room at Ridgewood, our home boundary school. We were told Lake Young's had space, but that we would have to provide our own transportation. Thankfully, my wife was a stay-at-home mom at the time and could drive him to and from Lake Young's. Not all kids who are high achieving and high cap level students or dual language students are able to have personal transportation to a school in either of those programs that are outside of their home boundary school. For some kids, both parents are working parents and don't have the time to drive their student to another school. For other kids, their parents may not even have access to a vehicle, or much less own a vehicle to drive their child to another school. The opportunity to participate in the high cap or dual language programs should not hinge on the child's parents' ability, or in many cases, inability to procure their own transportation to another school. Children most impacted by such a policy are more often those from poor and needy families. I hope the school district finds a way to implement policies and practices that will enable all high cap or dual language students, regardless of their situation at home, the opportunity to attend that program, the same opportunity that was afforded my son when he was a student in this district. No parent should be faced with the disappointing decision to decline that opportunity for their child simply because it was not feasible. I'm willing to assist the district in finding solutions and can leave my contact information if any of you are interested. Thank you for this chance to provide testimony on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So We're now on to section 4, the superintendent's report, if Superintendent Bell.
Thank you, President Clark. I'll begin my report tonight with a moment of silence for the Michigan State University victims of violence and their families who, I am sure, are still working through the pain and shock of this tragedy. My heartfelt condolences to the families and survivors, and I do not have words to express the heaviness in our hearts and at that thought of continued violence in our country and its effect on our own students and families. In addition, I also want to take a moment to remember the lives lost in the recent earthquake in Turkey. Our prayers are with survivors and this country as they struggle to recover from this natural disaster. So if you'll please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. On a brighter note, we are continuing to celebrate Career and Technical Education Month. And thank you again, Director Benno, for reading the CTE proclamation at our last meeting. Our CTE students have a lot to celebrate this year. 50 students from Kent Lake, Kent Ridge, Kentwood, and Kent Meridian High Schools qualified to compete at the DECA state competition next month.
Nice.
Yep. In addition, students in the culinary arts classes recently catered staff breakfasts and luncheons, and students in the creative cooking classes are participating in an Iron Chef competition, which are really cool, by the way. We look forward to hearing about the winners, and if there is ever a time to sample their cooking, yes, please let us know. Our KSD automotive students have earned 320 safety and pollution prevention industry certifications, and computer applications students have earned 21 Microsoft Office specialist certifications. Our culinary and marketing students have earned over 214 Washington State food worker cards so far this year. Thank you again to our amazing CTE teachers who provide these opportunities to help prepare students for their futures. As you know, there was a snow day this month, and I want to thank our inclement weather team who are out there driving the roads and checking school parking lots and student walking routes in the early morning hours. This team has worked hard to communicate clearly and in a timely manner to give our students, families, and staff, including those who are tasked to with keeping us safe, with as much notice as possible prior to any delay or closure of schools. We appreciate this team and their willingness to go the extra mile to ensure we remain safe when Mother Nature has other plans. And it's cold tonight, by the way. I want to thank our school board for your time and thoughtful engagement at our most recent board retreat last week. Your robust conversation and discussion related to the identification of who our community is and possible outreach efforts to connect, along with learning about board roles and specific communication about our 2023 bond. As you may be aware, the next bond conversation is tomorrow night at the Meeker Middle School Library from 6 to 7:30 p.m. We look forward to seeing our community and sharing bond information and answering questions about the bond measure on April 25th ballot. Kent School District takes pride in its long-standing commitment to teaching and learning, along with equity and serving all students well. Our buildings and facilities, although in good shape, do not reflect the quality of education provided to our students. With an average building age of 42 years, most schools were built prior to the invention of, ready for this, chicken nuggets, the launch of MTV, or the creation of the very first personal computer, let alone invention of the internet. While our capital planning facilities and maintenance teams and building operations teams are to be commended for their great work to keep our buildings safe and ready for students to learn, we need to ensure our buildings are modernized and improvements made for our students and their futures. The 2023 bond will fund projects over 6 years that address the following: health and safety, facility improvements, outdoor learning, district-wide program growth, and technology infrastructure. This funding will help keep our schools maintained while providing equitable access to safer and more modern learning environments for our students and staff. I encourage you to check our bond website for additional information. This last week, communications were distributed about the strategic plan committees to our greater KSD community with an invitation to join in the planning of our strategic plan refresh. We are establishing 4 committees, one for each of our strategic goals. The application is open until February 28th. If you know of anyone who would enjoy the opportunity to help plan for our future, please point them to our website for more information. A point on the horizon that we are keeping our eyes on is the ending of the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or commonly known as ESSER. This fund was established as part of the Education Stabilization Fund in the CARES Act. Our Associate Superintendent of Finance, Mr. Ben Rarick, has provided updates on the spending of ESSER dollars over the last 2 years and also about the ending of these federal funds. ESSER was intended to sustain school districts through the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have intentionally used these funds to do just that: sustain our staffing, recover learning loss, and maintain operations. Although ESSER is ending, we will remain fiscally responsible while keeping our focus on our students. This work will remain at the top of our priorities while we continue providing an excellent education along with an equitable allocation of resources and high-quality learning opportunities to each and every student, regardless of race, ethnicity, learning difference, linguistic ability, or zip code. I will reiterate our theme for this year: building bridges, every student, every voice, every day. Thank you, and this concludes my report.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, well, that takes us to the legislative update. If there are any remaining comment cards, they need to be turned into the blue box at the back table back there. President Hamada, would you give the legislative update?
Thank you, President Clark. I have a huge report that I've been going over, and I am not going to elaborate on all that, so you can all thank me for that. I'm trying to be concise and have it be meaningful, so I've worked on that a couple days in a row here, and even was on the phone with Mr. Rarick for some clarifications on stuff today, and tried to look at the 1:30 hearings on public TV to see if I could see what was happening with something that was happening at 1:30 today, but they didn't get to that yet before I had to leave for the meeting. But just as I mentioned last week, February 17th was the cutoff for most of the bills that were going to be going forward and stuff, so you can't present anything after that unless it's some emergency that the budget funding has kind of slid in there, or somebody with a lot of power puts in there and gets it in there. So the bills are what they are today to survive, and potentially some of them will become law and some of them won't. One of the bills that we were following was House Bill 1244, which increases the maximum amount per pupil limit for enrichment levies for school district with less than 40,000. And it is a very interesting bill, and learning about it, there's a lot of intricacies, but it looks like it's going to go forward. It has a lot of particulars in it that down the road may be helpful to us in our levies, with a lot of things that would probably have to be followed closely. But anywhere we can find potential that we can get the maximum for our kids, it's all about our kids. That's what we're centered on, to get the maximum dollars to help them. So that's still moving forward. And it had a hearing right at 1:30, but it wasn't on at 1:30. They had several bills on there, so they didn't get to it. But once it keeps going through all these different phases, committees, and And it was on the, today it was on the, some funding measures and some rules committees that they're going through. Once they keep going through this, and that does not have any amendments on it, so it's that bill alone, then it's a good sign that it's going to go all the way. Doesn't mean it for sure, but it's a good sign. The more they keep moving forward, the more success they get. House Bill 1436 is a special education bill that increases the excess cost multiplier over a 4-year period to our special education students. And it removes the 13.5, which 13.5 overall percentage of students to fund per district. At this particular time, we're not particularly worried about the 13.5, but it is included, and down the road it could be important if it's passed. But the multiplier could become very important, which means for our special education kids, an increase from 2023, 24, and then every biennial year till 2026, 27, it would increase the multiplier, which means that what the regular student gets and multiplied by that, it means, in essence, more dollars for our special education kids that have special needs. And I've learned today that we have different layers of that even in our funding. So there's a lot to this that I'm learning, so bear with me as I grow. House Bill 5311, or actually that's Senate Bill 5311, has moves the percentage of the overall population of students with special needs. It's the same kind of corresponding bill where it actually states in that bill, it moves it from 13 to 15% increase. And it has roughly the same, only specific ingredients to the multiplier. So both those bills are moving forward. And so that's a good sign that it looks like the special education bill somewhere along there is going to pass down the road. House Bill 1238 and Senate Bill 5339 is the bill where we fully feed students breakfast and lunch, is advancing to a fiscal hearing, so that's really good. And that sounds like that's a really good chance of getting through the legislature too, from what I understand. And it also, when I was on the WASDA call last week, not this week, they had their federal lobbyist in DC that also said that they thought that bill, that the feds were looking at it to continue maybe this universal bill to feed our kids breakfast and lunch. So anytime we get help from the feds, add it into the state, which trickles down to the district, is a good thing. But it sounds like they're on board more with wanting to feed our kids on a federal level than the special education, which is also in the federal level too. But it sounds like this one has a pretty good chance, even on a federal level, of kicking into making a difference. Senate Bill 5174 modifies the student transportation allocation formula and establishes related audit, reporting, and data collection. That's moving forward. And House Bill 1245 is where OSPI is to provide safety net awards to school districts with excess costs for homeless, foster, or special education students, because oftentimes those costs really start to climb, and we don't want, it's education here, all means all, and that's all our kids. We want to have all the services they need, so that's moving forward. House Bill 1353, amended Bill HJR 4203, failed to adopt a simple majority for the bond votes to change it, the 60% to a simple majority, so that's out. So guess what, folks? We got to pass our bonds at 60% for quite some while. So we have a bond, I understand, that's coming up. So vote and, vote your preference on that. And that pretty much is just a synopsis of the most important bills that are moving forward, which are the WASDA priorities and, our priorities. And stay tuned until next meeting and keep you posted. So thank you, President Clark. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Director Hamada. All right, this section 6 is, with the exception of one, all second readings to be adopted, and we've had extensive conversations on these. So if I can, I'd like to be fairly mechanical on this. Each of you would get 2, and I'll just work my way down to the right, and I'll start with Vice President Farrow. I'd ask for an approval of policy 1110. Move approval.
I move an approval of policy 1110.
On elections. Need a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion. Hearing none, call for the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by raising your right hand, saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Policy 111, oath of office. Director Hamada.
I move that 6.02, second reading and approval of policy 1111, oath of office, be approved.
Second.
Discussion. All right, all those in favor of the motion signify by raising their right hand, saying aye.
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 Thank you. All right, need an approval of 1112, director orientation.
I move,
It's
we're gonna,
Megan.
okay.
A motion for an approval of the second reading and approval of policy 1112, director orientation.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Hearing none, call for the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by raising their right hand, saying aye.
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 Thank you. All right, that takes us to policy 1113, board member residency.
I move that we approve 6.04, policy approval 1113, board member residency.
Second.
Discussion. All right, call for the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by raising their right hand, saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All right, starting again. Look for 1114, board member resignation and vacancy as a policy.
I move that we approve policy number 114, board member resignation and vacancy.
Oh, I'll second.
Whatever.
All right, any discussion?
So much for mechanical.
Call for the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by raising their right hand, saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. That takes us to the need for policy 2411, high school equivalency.
I move that 6.06, second reading and approval of policy 2411, high school equivalency certificate be approved.
Second.
Discussion. Hearing none, call for the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by raising their right hand, saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. That takes us to 6112, rental or lease of district real property.
I move for approval of item number 6.07, policy 6112, rental or lease of district real estate property be approved.
Second.
Discussion. Hearing none, call for the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by raising your right hand and saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right, before I get to this last one, because it's not a second reading, just for the audience, if you haven't been tracking this, we've already had very thorough evening discussions twice on these policies. So this was the final drill down to just embed it into actual policy. So it's a formality, but believe me, there was plenty of discussion prior to that. All right, with that, that takes us to 608 and a retirement.
I move 6.08, retirement of policy 1115, vacancies.
Second.
Discussion. Hearing none, call for the question. All those in favor of the motion, raise your right hand, saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Point of information, President Clark.
Yep.
I'm not sure that Robert's Rules of Order says that we have to go in order for,
No, I absolutely recognize it, but given the fact that we have had extensive discussions, I didn't want people picking, favorite policies and then just standing back and we trip through it, because the simple fact is, again, this is actually the third meeting on these things. So I appreciate what you're saying. You're absolutely correct. I was just trying to be orderly in our process.
Thank you.
All right, that takes us into the consent calendar. First of all, is there anything, anybody wants to pull any number on the consent calendar?
I want to pull 7.01.
701, I'm going to pull 708. Anybody else? All right, at that point then, the chair would,
Yes, I'm sorry. I was looking for the right number. 7.04.
okay. So the chair would entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar minus 701, 704, and 708.
I move, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I so move.
Yes, I second.
Okay, so we're clear on what we're doing. So this is the majority of the consent calendar minus 3 items that we'll have further discussion on. All those in favor of the motion?
Discussion.
Oh, yes, discussion on those other items. Any discussion on those other items? Okay, with that, then I'm going to go ahead and call for the question. All those in favor of the motion, which would be the consent calendar minus the 3 items we're now going to discuss, signify by raising the right hand and saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. All right, now we'll start with 701.
Okay, I move that we accept 7.01, early hiring for certificated staff.
I second.
And
Discussion.
discussion, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to pull that because I actually, in the agenda setting, wanted to know more about that and was very nicely given a lot of information from Human Resources with, about that. And I was really impressed with all the people that we're hiring early and getting out there, which we haven't done before, because we know how important that is. And I just wanted the public to realize that we're doing things a little differently and on top of it, so I'm just tooting our own horn here, I guess. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Leslie. All right, with that, we have a motion and a second, is that correct? Okay, any further discussion? All right, hearing none, call for the question on 701, early hiring for certificated staff. Raise your right hand, signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, thank you. All right, 704.
I move to accept item number 7.04, Kent Phoenix Academy Boiler Replacement Project Final Acceptance.
I second.
All right, discussion.
Well, boilers may not be sexy, but we like warm buildings, and I am just so excited about all that is happening in our district to really make our buildings, especially KPA, really great places for our students. I've had the opportunity to go and look at that school just recently and seeing how much is happening, so thank you very much to the team that is working there and all that they're doing. And you know, as we look at all the things that go into making our schools really wonderful places, sometimes it's a boiler that just needs to be replaced, and it's really important. And I wanted to take a moment to say thank you to the team that did that, and just knowing that our tax dollars go to work to do these really important things. So thank you very much.
All right, so the opening of that building is tied to, obviously, the increase in student bodies because of middle school realignment. So my question for the superintendent is, how old is that structure that we've now put significant money into to upgrade?
Yeah, that's a question that I believe Executive Director Buzzard can answer for us.
Good evening, President Clark, members of the board, Superintendent Villa, Ms. Santello, and Ms. Carey. Yes, that building was built in the 60s. I want to say it was 65 or 66. A lot of great things were built in 66. Throw that out there. But yes, you are right. And I want to bring up a point of why I'm standing here, and just to explain to our community. That building was a junior high long before where we're going to turn it back into a junior high again.
Right.
That building's around I mean, I'm 57 years old, right? So, I mean, do the math. It's pretty easy. A brand-new building right now, to tear down that building and rebuild a new middle school would cost somewhere between $175 and $190 million. We're going to take this building, plus that the board had approved an $8 million. $8 million is not a lot of money when you think about it, especially when we're putting in a very awesome synthetic field in the back of that building with an 8-lane running rubber track. So think about what that's going to be, almost half the budget. So, you know, you have about $4 million plus into that building to get that back up to speed for somewhere between 800 and 900 kids to be. So, again, I want to make sure that our community knows that, you know, we, again, like you said, Director Margell, we are spending our dollars as we need, as we see fit, and as we know as we're saving the district dollars. Even with managing it, even with subbing it, even with the things that we do within the capital planning and the capital projects team, where we save the district money by not hiring a general contractor, by not hiring an architect. Just want to make sure our public knows that.
Great, thank you very
So,
much.
quick question. 175 to 195, one floor or 2 floors?
It depends. That's, I mean, that's a pretty good guesstimate of about what a middle school costs right now.
Right, right.
And if we get into the high schools, it's $250 million.
Especially, I mean, that is such a huge school. The replace is.
It's our largest middle school in footprint.
Yeah.
And in classroom space.
Well, and one of the things, again, I think I mentioned this at the last board meeting, but the size of the classrooms, they just don't make them that size. And for the arts and for the CTE and all that, and what I saw just, you know, walking through that, I think if you close your eyes, when it's all done, I think it's going to be just a whole different atmosphere. Yeah. And
I'm excited for our community, our board, our students especially, to come through those doors.
Yeah.
I've built Covington Elementary, Kent Laboratory Academy, I should say but, you know, I was blessed to be a part of that team to head it up, and also River Ridge. But I'll tell you what, this is one that I'm going to really take personally, because I've been out there a lot, every week, on Fridays, and I'm managing it. So I'm going to be I want to see the faces of the children that come through there and the families that come through there once we do it.
On that note, I wanted just a special thank you to our team who's doing that work and to our board who has visited that building. The entire board will have visited that building after this week.
Right.
And so I want to make sure to get that out to our community, that you're out there, you're taking a look and making sure that, you know, these things are happening. So thank you, Mr. Berzer.
Thank you.
And I also appreciate, like, because since we're voting on the boiler replacement, but like when we went on our visit, pointing out the things that we may not, like, ultimately, people are going to see paint, people are going to see cabinets.
Right.
But it's the little things that we don't necessarily see, like the boiler and some of those things I think are really important to kind of, those are huge investments that we need to have to make sure our students are safe in these buildings. So I really do appreciate all the work that's been done and looking forward to seeing the final product.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. With the board's acceptance, I'm going to move the approval of 708 gift acceptance.
Do we need to vote?
Don't we need to vote on the boiler?
No, I thought we already didn't.
No, we
No, we didn't.
Oh,
We were discussing.
my
was discussion.
apologies.
Yeah, no, we were
All right,
discussing.
so dealing with the Phoenix Academy Boiler Replacement Project final acceptance, all those in favor of the motion signify by raising their right hand and saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Right, now, with the board's acceptance, I would move approval of 708 gift acceptance.
Second.
Okay, now, the reason I pulled that is we got this late, and so I got the data on it, and some people are doing some really special things to support the education process in various buildings. And I just want to acknowledge this is, you know, outside money coming in. So Martin Sertoon got a gift from Special Olympics Washington to the tune of $2,000 for equipment purchase, and obviously that's a tie with what they do there. Jenkins Creek Elementary got a playground piece of equipment from the Jenkins Creek PTA, and that was $1,200, not to be sneezed at. And George Daniel Elementary got a significant amount of STEM materials for engineering, robotics, and coding work from Pocket Prep to the tune of $1,343. So I want to say thank you to those people for helping us in our making individual programs more successful. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for the question. All those in favor of the motion of approving 708 gift acceptance, raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you very much. All right, that takes us to informational. Any comments on the informational materials that you've been provided with? Okay, so final communication from the audience.
Ms. Santello?
Good evening, President Clark, members of the board, and Superintendent Vela. There are no further comments from the audience this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. All right, that takes us to 9:02, which would be board reports. Director Margell.
I don't have a long one tonight, and again, I'll always try to keep it under 3 minutes, but just a couple different things I wanted to bring up is we were just, I pulled out the boiler because we like talking about boilers, but really I like to talk about KPA and just being able to say I've gone out there twice and being able to just see how much has happened from a few months ago to where it is today. And just, it was a pretty big, bold promise that was made that this is going to be ready for school in September. And while I'm not an expert, I can say it has definitely gone far and it looks great. So it was fun to be able to visit, and I look forward to visiting it again as work continues to move on that school. Also was able to participate in the board retreat. Just want to say thank you to my fellow board members. I really like working with you all. We all come with a variety of backgrounds and experiences, and I think it's the richness of where we come from that round out the board. So thank you for the time with that. I also look forward to us doing more to be able to outreach to communities that might have a little less involvement on their face with the district, and how we do that as a board to bring that involvement up. I also just want to say I talked about it last time. I had the opportunity to go to the Kick It Up competition at Kent Ridge, and Kent Ridge Chatelaines hosted and did performances, but we also got to see performances from our middle schools. So Northwood Middle School, the Diamonds, which is a combined program for Meridian and Matson, and then Meeker Middle School. And just amazing talent, great dedication of coaches, and a lot of excitement. I want to say that there was 42 other schools from around the state. It was a huge, huge thing, and the dance party at the end was fantastic. So please come out and support the arts and the Chatelaines, and just a shout out to Coach Iggy and just all the great things that she's doing with that team. So that concludes my report.
Thank you. Director Benno.
Yes, I'm going to start with some kudos to Kent Lake and Kent Ridge for achieving accreditation. I know my school went through that recently too. It's a big process, so that's some great kudos. Thanks for your hard work. We already heard earlier, it's still CTE month, and I'm always going to champion all the great work with CTE, and so kudos for all the great work happening around the district when it comes to CTE. Specifically, like I'm thinking like tomorrow I have to take a serve safe management test because I'm next door to the culinary teacher and help with catering and whatnot. And so by default, I got invited to take that test that's not required for catering for some of those family consumer science and culinary teachers. So thank you for all your hard work on that. So I too also went to the retreat. I don't need to duplicate, but I appreciate my colleagues and our discussions. I've also been trying to meet with board members individually, having coffee, just connecting, because one of the things I had a complaint about, and I'm like, oh, why am I complaining? I should do something about it. So I'm connecting with my board colleagues and having coffee, checking in, seeing how people are doing. Upcoming, so tomorrow, so I was supposed to leave today for vacation, but I rescheduled because there was availability for me to go visit schools tomorrow. And one of the things I like to do is just go visit schools. So I'm going to go visit Neely O'Brien and Daniel Elementary tomorrow and kind of see what's going on. So I'm excited for that. And then I will take some well-deserved time the rest of my midwinter break. We got an email, I think all the board members, I think we all got it, for science night at Lake Young's, the planning committee. I'm going to try to go to that to see what's going on. I know there was a lot of excitement by that, so I'm going to go check that out. I also got a very nice email from the Kent Ridge robotics team, and I'm planning to go visit. I'm not going to commit to being a mentor, but I want to go and see what's going on, because I just don't have time for that. But I want to go visit and see, and I'm going to try to go to one of their competitions that are coming up. So I'm very excited about that. I also am going to go to the PTA Reflections Awards, which I think is Monday here. So I want to check that out as well. At some point, I looked at my calendar. The only bond meeting I can attend, the community bond meeting, is at Mill Creek, whenever that is. So I'm hoping to make it. All the other ones just don't work with my schedule. But I plan to go to a bond meeting at some point because I want to hear what the community has to say and watch the wonderful presentation. I too am also looking forward to the strategic planning, since I'm supposed to be the Goal 1 champion. So I'm looking forward to doing that and being a part of that team. And hopefully we get some great turnout from our community to kind of join all these committees. A couple of curiosities. I saw the Seattle Times article where they kind of highlighted River Ridge and walking safety and pedestrian safety. And so it reminds me of conversations we've had about the city of SeaTac and some of the things going on. So I hope that gets resolved and taken care of very quickly, just because it's kind of concerning kind of seeing that. And there is a lot of things to kind of think about with student safety, specifically when we're looking at walking, and that is not a very safe area over there for students to be walking. So I really hope that gets taken care of. And if you're curious, check out that Seattle Times article. And then also, I feel like last year around this time, I visited with student GSA clubs at most of the middle schools and high schools, and I want to do that again. So I'm kind of putting that into the universe. And that is it for my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Hamada.
Well, I'm going to lead off with February 19th was a day of remembrance. And that's kind of a big deal with me to bring that to the public, as my husband was born in an internment camp. And that's the day that we should kind of recognize what happened to a lot of citizens in this country. They were citizens that were interned, and there was an order from the president that took those people out of their homes and took all their belongings except for one suitcase. And off they went to camps, which they called them, and they couldn't leave. So let's keep that in our thoughts, that we know better, do better. We had a board retreat, and it was excellent, ran by one of our WASDA leaders, and I thought she had some real interesting insight to see all our community partners. And when you put them all, we had them all over, bringing them up. It was amazing to see how many, we say, I'm talking for my community, or this is my, and really, our community is so big that these things I never even thought of. And it was interesting how we came up with so many, so that was very helpful. I wanted to highlight, and I brought with me the newspaper article on the 4A wrestling team, and what did I do with that, with the kids' names on it? We had several kids that placed on that team, and Sarah Wright, who represented Kentwood Girls, took third, and Kentwood Chase Barker, who is a junior, in the 4A class, 220 pounds, was a champion. He won all 4 of his matches. And let's see, we had Kent Meridian, had the best team results of any school in the district, which is pretty interesting. And they were led by freshman Adana Garza, who made his way to the championship match for 120 pounds. And Ramazan Foldo finished 4th. Yassar Hassis finished 5th, and Jackson Esserman placed 8th. And these wrestling team in the last couple of years have really come up at KM. So that's just all of them as a team did really well. Kentridge's wrestlers etched themselves back into the final standings of the state championship tournament with Emilio Tolomei. Tolomei, thank you. He placed 4th. And Jahim Zakah and Mr. Williams, the number 4th, I'm not even going to try the first name, wrestled at 130-pound division, placed 6th and 8th. So we had a really good showing from all our schools, and even Kent Lake out there. I've gone to their district events, and they've done very well. So we are doing some great things with our athletics. The Monday reflections, I hope to be back from the day on the Hill with the kids, because we're going to be there starting early in the morning. Our Director of Equity and I are taking several kids, I think we're taking 5, up for a whole day, and they have a day of activities to tour the Capitol up there at Olympia, and we've scheduled some particular meetings with certain representatives, and they're going to go up and tell them how they think about things. So that'll be fun. And the Sunday before that, I'm going up to the Legislators' Day up there in Olympia at South Puget Sound College. I went 2 years ago when they last had it in person. And they have some really good speakers there. You get to meet with legislators. You get to meet with a lot of district legislative reps, so you can talk about that, and that'll be a good day. But I hope to be back by 6 o'clock, because that reflections with the kids, the PTA winners, and they fill this whole area, and the winners of the kids, and all of them are winners, but the ones finalists are amazing in the projects they bring forward, and our PTAs do a really good job of bringing that forward on Monday night. And this Friday, I'm going to be at East Hill. The principal there has invited me to do some reading. And I do want to mention just the River Ridge article, which I'm not so sure was written in totality with all the details, but I drove out there, and it's been a while since I've been out there. And the times I was out there, the traffic was really pretty low. But I've also been out there when the kids are getting in and out of school, and it's quite a bit. So I'm wondering, and I'd be more than happy, and I'm sure any board member or all the board members would be happy to set up at least a session with the city of SeaTac and see if maybe we can't get a patrol car out there to sit out there at the busiest times. And that would be the city of SeaTac that would have to go with us, but be more than willing to do that until we can get that sidewalk in. They have cleared it, and there are some little bumps that stick up, I don't know what you call them, dividing the road, but it's not you're very close to the road there, and there's a lot of children that live in those apartments on the corner. So I'd like to see if it's get to some answers on that if we can. But I think perhaps the article in the paper didn't have all the facts in it, but we need to follow through, because our kids, that's why we're here, our kids. And that concludes my report.
Director or Vice President Farrer.
Well, thank you, President Clark. I just wanted to say that I am going to look forward to visiting schools tomorrow, and I didn't have the chance to visit KPA last time, so I'll be looking forward to seeing all the progress made at KPA. And I want to conclude by saying to the staff, again, thank you for what you do every day. And I appreciate you. A few of you are here, but those are listening online or want to hear this and watch this, know that you are appreciated. our Kent School District staff is, in my opinion, the best in the business. So that concludes my report.
Thank you. So I had the pleasure last week of dropping in on Kent Elementary. I was the fortunate guest of Denisha Salcedo, and got an opportunity to interchange with her sixth grade class. And I have to say, one of the things that we are always trying to develop is leadership. And leadership is where the student stops being simply directed, but is rather given a task and direction, and then they're in charge and the execution of that. And so I got to see how she was developing that among those kids, and I began to realize, because I don't normally work with that particular age group, how significant that was because of what it did for their self-confidence. It was real clear that we had a very shy kid, but she was given an opportunity to do something. And she didn't say a lot, but you could tell it was really important to her what she was doing, which is appropriate. Other than that, I have the dubious honor as being your president to sit through the audit committee tomorrow, so I'll be thinking of you. The rest of you are doing whatever. All right, with that, it's 7:30 and we are adjourned.
Thank you.